Robert Paxton, widely considered the authority on fascism, wrote in 2017 that while Trump sounded like a fascist during the 2016 campaign, he was not a fascist because unlike Trump, Mussolini and Hitler had no desire to leave economic, social, or environmental matters to unchecked market forces, nor did they think that the population could be unified without forceful state action.
Wrong.
See, while the business communities of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy benefited from the destruction of labor unions, the prohibition of strikes, and lucrative contracts for public works and rearmament, the economy was still dominated by the state, while Trump was seeking removal of state interference in the market. Following January 6th, Paxton recanted. In an op-ed titled, "I've hesitated to call Donald Trump a fascist until now," he wrote, "Trump's incitement of the invasion of the Capitol removes my objection to the fascist label." But January 6th doesn't resolve the contradiction identified by Paxton in 2017. If Trump is a fascist but leaves so much up to market forces, his fascism must be of a unique kind. Now, last year, I wrote an essay for ZNet, linked below, where I argue that this unique kind of fascism deserves a new name. And I offered one. I'm going to tell you right now. Ready? Trump is a fascist, but his fascism could be called inverted fascism because the role of corporate power in his fascism is inverted, coming before the interests of the nation state rather than after it. Inverted fascism as a global phenomenon, I think, is best understood not just as a series of foreign and domestic policies that emphasize repression in favor of widening inequality, although it is certainly that. Even more so, it's best understood as a collection of political, economic, sociological, ideological, and historical conditions and rationalizations that reflect trends in poverty, inequality, violence, and de-democratization that we see today. Here's what I mean. I've noted Mark Fisher wrote of British students that they seem to suffer from the condition of reflexive impotence, a state in which they know things are bad, but more than that, they know they can't do anything about it. And he wrote that in 2009 about the UK. Now, fast forward over a decade and travel to the US, where neoliberalism has been far more harsh than it has been for the UK. For us, inequality is more exaggerated, poverty is worse, there's no government healthcare, and the impossible weight of the expenses of higher education leave much of the country either in debt or without any method of upward mobility. Our society is one in which today's generations will be worse off than the generations preceding them. And the result of that is not just a belief that things are bad, rather that things are deteriorating and nothing can be done to stop the descent into chaos. And part of this is nihilistic violence like school shootings. On April 17th, 2025, a mass shooting occurred at Florida State University in which 2 people were killed and 7 people were injured. Following, a video surfaced of a young woman filming herself walking by an injured woman lying face down on the ground while she sipped from a cup of Starbucks iced coffee. The video was subject to much discourse. The Tallahassee Democrat even published an article about it and subsequent outrage over its surfacing. And there was a dispute about whether the girl filmed herself drinking her Starbucks on purpose. If she had, her depravity was appalling. If she hadn't, her desensitization was shocking. Many voiced outrage that she was filming at a time like that at all. Any answer to any number of questions that arises after watching the video points towards a sociological dimension of inverted fascism as a pervasive atmosphere whereby even at the epicenter of the late-stage capitalist nihilistic implosion that is a school shooting, societal deterioration is simply assumed and not an impediment to tapping into the communicative matrix or consumption. Now, there is overwhelming support for comprehensive gun control legislation in the US, but why hasn't it passed? A condition of inverted fascism is that corporate dollars hold more sway over policy than public opinion. The NRA has spent countless millions propping up politicians who make sure that comprehensive gun control legislation isn't implemented, which brings us to this dickhead. Over the course of Trump's first term, over 100,000 people were killed in gun violence in the US, an increasing number of them in mass shootings, like the one in Las Vegas that killed 58 people, the one in Sutherland Springs, Texas church that killed 25 people, including a pregnant woman, and the one that killed 17 people, 14 students, and 3 staff members at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. After the shooting in Parkland, CNN held a town hall with survivors and the family of survivors and several politicians, including Marco Rubio, then a senator from Florida. And when he was asked if he planned on continuing to take money from the NRA, Rubio rambled for like a long time, but did get out. Quote, "The influence of these groups," talking about the NRA, "comes not from money. The influence comes from the millions of people that agree from the agenda." However, in 2013, 2015, and 2016, Rubio opposed efforts to strengthen background checks. But according to a poll done by Public Polling Policy, 70% of registered voters in Florida either believed Rubio supported background checks or weren't sure what his position was. So who's really in the driver's seat for policy? And Rubio has been the ultimate vehicle for capital and repression in the face of a global system that is deteriorating. He tried repeatedly to appeal the Affordable Care Act, was given an A+ rating from the NRA, and in 2017 voted for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which Josh Hoxie of the Institute for Policy Studies called the biggest wealth grab in modern history. At the same time, he voted for the anti-immigrant Laken Riley Act, supported restrictions on abortion, and forwarded an anti-LGBTQAI+ agenda that got him a 0 out of 100 rating from the Human Rights Campaign in 2022. Rubio, forwarding a repressive agenda that serves the interests of big money, is discernible on virtually every issue. AIPAC. AIPAC! The American Israel Public Affairs Committee is one of the largest and most influential lobbying groups in the US, and from the time of his first Senate campaign in 2010, his last in 2022, Rubio received over $1 million from AIPAC and other pro-Israel lobbying organizations, making him, while he was in the Senate, one of the Israel lobby's top recipients. Unsurprisingly, not long after the US and Israel launched their war on Iran, Max Blumenthal reported on leaked audio he received from AIPAC's CEO saying about Rubio, now the Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, quote, "They are now our lifelines inside the administration." Now, Israel itself has succumbed to inverted fascism. Benjamin Netanyahu once said he wanted to be remembered as the protector of Israel, and his supporters have called him Mr. Security, while in neoliberal fashion, he oversaw budget cuts and hollowed out Israel's social services. In 2023, Netanyahu endeavored to severely limit the Israeli judiciary's powers over the Knesset, and later that year, he embarked Israel on one of the most brazen genocides of the 21st century. So naturally, when Israel went after Iran, the US was happy to follow. As Rubio put it on March 2nd, he probably did this first. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed, and then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Now, this war is the most abject expression of the violence of capitalism, as its sole motivation is the cultivation of a global order organized around extraction and exploitation that can only benefit a collection of oil magnates, multinational corporations, and the military-industrial complex. And there's a history behind this. One national security decision memorandum from November 1970 noted that Nixon had approved the policy of, quote, promoting cooperation between Iran and Saudi Arabia Arabia as a desirable basis for maintaining stability in the Persian Gulf while recognizing the preponderance of Iranian power. The Iranian regime at that time had been installed by the US to unseat a nationalist one. In 1951, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized Iranian oil, which was dominated by the British at the time. And over the course of 4 days, in August of 1953, Kermit Roosevelt, grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, successfully executed a coup that resulted in a new prime minister being appointed and power being placed back in the hands of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran's Shah, who in 1954 signed the Consortium Agreement, effectively turning over Iran's oil industry to US, British, and French oil companies. Now the Shah, with hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment and services from the US military and the CIA, ruled brutally, largely through SAVAK, the Organization of National Intelligence and Security, which the Shah established after the coup, effectively Iran's secret police. According to one testimony recorded by Amnesty International summing up the experience of prisoners, trigger warning: first, he is beaten by several torturers at once with sticks and clubs. If he doesn't confess, he is hanged upside down and beaten. If he still shows signs of resistance, he is given electric shock which turns him into a howling dog. And if he is still obstinate, his nails and sometimes his teeth are pulled out. That's the US-backed dictatorship that was overthrown in Iran in 1979. So what's really behind this Rubio-led policy of intervention? When Rubio was running for president in 2016, he took on the campaign slogan, "A New American Century," which, as some of you may remember, was borrowed from the neoconservative think tank, the Project for a New American Century, which was founded in 1997 by Robert Kagan and William Crystal, who would write, "American hegemony is the only reliable defense against a breakdown of peace and international order." Coming out of the 1960s, neoconservatism formed in opposition to the anti-war movement and the isolation of some ardent conservatives. It became most associated with Senator Henry Jackson in the 1970s, a Democrat who militantly opposed détente with the USSR and consistently advocated increases in defense spending. Reagan, who declared a war on terror in the Middle East and Central America, had Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl in his administration, both of whom were aides to Jackson. Reagan's Secretary of State, George Shultz, outlining in 1984, which would later become the Bush Doctrine, stated, "We must reach a consensus that our responses to terrorism would go beyond passive defense to active prevention, preemption, and retaliation." In this pursuit, neocons like Elliot Abrams, who would serve in Trump's first administration, oversaw the genocidal campaign supported by the US in Central America. Following 9/11, Bush re-invoked Reagan's war on terror. According to Jeremy Scahill, national security operatives took up the mantra, "The world is a battlefield." That December, Dick Cheney stated there were 40 or 50 countries that potentially needed military disciplining, and by 2015, according to Physicians for Social Responsibility, possibly as many as 2 million people were killed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and that doesn't include countless interventions that took place simultaneously. What is happening today is the military disciplining of Iran and Venezuela, both countries where US hegemonic influence was challenged with the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela in 1999 and the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. And the US doesn't even try to hide this. The Trump administration today is seeking the return of Pahlavi's son to rule the country for a transitionary period. And I say, Trump's foreign policy is distinctly indicative of inverted fascism because unlike the neoconservative invasion of Iraq, there have been basically no propaganda efforts to convince the country that this is necessary or legitimate. There haven't been any efforts like Bush's coalition of the willing or his endeavors at the UN to bring international recognition as a form of legitimacy. Rather, this is simply an insanely brutal and chaotic policy that was initiated without even congressional approval, which is mandated by the Constitution. Virtually no one wants this. Reuters Ipsos found only 1 in 4 Americans approved of US strikes on Iran. So things are just actively deteriorating, and many of us are left under the impression that there is nothing we can do to stop the descent into chaos. So what I tried to do just now is touch on a couple characteristics of a political movement that I think could be understood as inverted fascism, as well as a condition of inverted fascism that has come to characterize politics, society, economics, and international relations. So if you're interested in me expanding on this concept, like, comment, and subscribe. The publishers will look twice at my new book, and I have a PDF of my old book that I couldn't get published, but if anyone is interested, I'd love to send out a copy. And also, please donate to CERS, now off and on. Donate to Fairfax Mutual Aid, the mutual aid org that Duncan and I volunteer with, and or donate to any one of the links down there, providing aid to those experiencing the worst of the legacy of colonialism.